Well, in chapter 7, we have a persecution that breaks out against the church. And the early persecutions of the church it's really a Jewish issue. It's this new faith in Jesus Christ is really at this point just a sect of Judaism versus other sects of Judaism. And this persecution breaks out as a conflict between these kingdoms that we've spoken about, this very earthly kingdom, this desire of the Jews to have their own kingdom back, to not be under Roman rule, versus this very spiritual kingdom of Jesus and his followers. What is it that, why does this inevitably lead to persecution? And if kind of the kingdom of Jesus has been maybe accepted by people as this return to God and a renewed relationship with God, how are they supposed to fit the idea of persecution into what should be kind of a reunion and a return to blessing, a return to the garden?
Great question. And it is interesting that at the establishment of this kingdom, it does seem like, and obviously there's a fair amount of joy going on, and you get that impression, but very quickly it definitely turns to persecution. But, Jesus told his disciples, if they've hated me and persecuted me, your master, they'll do the same to you, and kind of paves the way for that, and even lets Peter know, like, in your later years, you're going to be a captive. And so I think Jesus kind of paved the way, but still, I think many of them may have found it surprising. And then you look, a lot of the epistles are written specifically to those who are enduring persecution, who probably needed no small amount of encouragement to kind of stand up in the face of that. Obviously, now you've got two kingdoms whose goals don't align, and in some ways are actually antagonistic to each other. And it's no surprise there's a conflict, but the Christian culture, you get the idea that they didn't really have a political aim, whereas obviously the Jews of the day had a very political aim, and even found maybe the Christians not only not supporting their goals, but maybe even being counter to it in some ways. And it's one of those things, you could have your own religion in the Roman kingdom, as long as you still gave your absolute allegiance to to Caesar. And oftentimes, Christians were kind of persecuted under the guise, well, you have a king who's not Caesar, and things of the sort. And I don't know how real that was, or just a political guise to gain power over them and stuff. But but maybe they perhaps viewed that as a threat that might bring Rome down upon the area as well, and be very harmful to their political aims.
Yeah, I think that there's an understanding within both sects of Judaism that the idea of that the Romans have of keep your religion in its place, and that place doesn't have anything to do with politics, really is not tenable for either side of the equation here. It's not tenable for the Jews who are trying to reestablish their own kingdom. It's not ultimately tenable for the Christians either. If you look at the situation here with first Stephen and then Paul is obviously there taking part in the persecution, and then the later persecutions that happen. Is there a reason that God might be allowing this persecution, and does this persecution in some ways play to the strength of a spiritual kingdom and show the weakness of a physical kingdom?
Absolutely. And you get the, I don't remember what chapter it's in, maybe 7 or 8, when the persecution breaks out, but it talks about very directly the result of the persecution is the spread of the gospel outside of the walls of Jerusalem. And you see this very positive effect, and the fact that it's not political plays into that it can spread outside of those walls and is widely accepted. It's not just it's not just about Jerusalem. It's not just about Israel. And I can't help but think of the parallel with St. Augustine of Hippo, who at the sacking of the Roman Empire, is seeing Rome fall, and yet writes the kingdom of God at that time, seeing the greater importance of the spiritual kingdom over the earthly kingdom in the same sense.
Yeah, and it is very interesting that this movement of the Jewish people will end in the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, and there's something about a spiritual kingdom that has a certain immunity to physical force, and you can kind of see this with Stephen. What is it about what Stephen does that kind of highlights this?
He emulates Jesus in his death, and he says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And somehow, he has the face of an angel and is looking upon the heavens, and even in martyrdom is finding a serenity and a joy, even facing death, and it kind of shows that the kingdom of God is stronger than even the grave, let alone the political systems.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you see this so early on in the book of Acts, because it really shows what was wrong with the previous kingdoms and what the weaknesses were with those previous kingdoms, and why Jesus' proclamation of a different kind of kingdom and now the establishment of that different kind of kingdom is so vital, so important, because there are just so many limitations of a physical kingdom that this spiritual kingdom isn't bound by. Now, the mistake, I guess, that a lot of people make is they see the lack of a physical kingdom and the lack of those physical tools as a weakness, but really, what's the strength of this spiritual kingdom in face of that?
So that the physical kingdom can die and the spiritual kingdom lives on. There's not a lot. You want to look and say, okay, how many physical kingdoms have been on the earth, for the last 5,000 years without periods of not being here, or in any sense the same. And you're hard pressed to really point to much of any. And so they're going to come and go, including, the one we live in. But, since the establishment of the church, we get that picture in Daniel where it kind of breaks the kingdoms of the world and fills the world and lives on. And, it's funny, you see it ebb and flow in different nations around the earth and stuff like this, and you might see it grow strong in one and weak in another, and vice versa at different times. But whether a country itself becomes strong or weak, the kingdom of God lives on.